Hello, thank you for joining me again on Facebook Live on the NASS page. I ran a session here 2 weeks ago and some of you will have joined me for that. Some of you may have seen it afterwards and some of you may be completely new to this. So I'll just briefly introduce myself again. I'm Diane Aronson. I'm a counsellor with a previous background as a mental health occupational therapist. And I work as a counsellor with people largely with long-term conditions. My main work at the moment is with people with brain injury, but I have a long association with people with AS due to the fact that I live and work in Bath and used to contribute to the 2-week residential course that runs here in what used to be the Little Mineral Water Hospital. So 2 weeks ago I talked about emotional well-being, and one of the things that I suggested for people with a condition such as yourselves or people that you know with AS is a way of learning acceptance. And I know that's always a very difficult word. One of the questions was, could I talk a bit more about it? So there is a type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, and I'm just going to talk through a bit of that today, introduce you to some basic principles about it. I'm planning on talking for about 45 minutes. And in that time, there'll be a couple of 1-minute slots where I just ask you to have a go at something in your own minds, wherever you are. So I hope all of you are as well as can be. Once again, we're in these strange circumstances with people at home due to the COVID-19 situation. Some of you may be going out to work, some of you may have returned to work this week, and many of you will be at home, either working from home or not working. And this is a lovely way to connect with people. And comments I had last time, I know there were people that I used to know in Bath, and it's lovely to think that some of you are out there and I can have this sense of connection with you again. So, talking about ACT. What is ACT? I say ACT because acceptance and commitment therapy gets abbreviated to ACT, but they always pronounce it as ACT, the originators of this type of way of working. And the reason they say ACT is part of it is what's called committed action. So it's not only about how you think and feel, but about what you do. Now, I'm aware that talking about it might sound a bit theoretical, and I really want it to be of use to you. So please, do send some feedback or ask questions afterwards. Bit of background. It's a psychological therapy, and many of you will have heard of cognitive behavioural therapy, and that's abbreviated to CBT. Some of you may not have done, I don't know. But just referring back to something I said last time, which is there is a recorded very high incidence of people reporting mental health issues, particularly with AS. Not all of you, but a significant minority. And the treatment that has been available as talking therapies from GP practices in recent years has been CBT. And there are some issues with it. So CBT is about how you think and how you can change your thinking and how your thinking relates to how you feel. And there have been some real problems with that with people with long-term conditions, certainly in brain injury. They've moved away from using CBT so much. And part of that is because some of it's presented in my mind a bit simplistically, which is if you can recognise what your negative thoughts are, then the obvious thing is you can turn them into positive thoughts. And it's not that simple. It's very complex. There are ways that people work with people to do this. But for some people, it kind of leads to self-judgments about, I can't do that, I can't change my thinking, and there's a pressure. In the psychological world, there's what's called the third wave of psychology, and a lot of this is based upon mindfulness. And Sophie has now done 2 mindfulness sessions, so I'm really hoping that you will have tuned into those as well. It's not all about mindfulness, it's just using that as a base. And the other 2 big therapeutic approaches that have come out of that are ACT and something called compassion focused therapy, which I also use. So that's a bit about the background. And I will say, again, with research, they're finding ACT is an incredibly effective way to work with people who are having to live with physical difficulties as well as emotional and psychological difficulties. I think the first thing to say is something about the myth of happiness. And a lot of what I'm saying today is based upon a book called The Happiness Trap. And I will be putting a link on the website to that. And it's a strange word with quite a lot of pressure in Western society to be happy. But what do we mean by that? You know, the fairy tales, there's a great long story and all the trials and tribulations, and the last line is always, and they lived happily ever after. Well, there's no such thing. If you think of happy moments in your life, they're actually happy moments. Those lovely days, maybe it was a wedding or a special birthday or a special family occasion, the days, most of those I have to say, are connected with us all getting together, which we're all missing at the moment. But they are temporary and the feeling stays with us. But this is about being human and all the variety of human emotions that we live with. And in ACT, the aim is not so much for happiness, but about how we can lead rich and fulfilling lives with whatever is going on with us. It's a bit like if you went for a long walk and it started raining, a complete downpour while you were outside, and you weren't prepared, you hadn't expected it, you didn't have an umbrella, you didn't have a coat. I mean, sometimes it's like that in life, isn't it? That something hits you. Maybe it's COVID, maybe it's AS, but you're on the long walk, the rain hits, and it's awful. And the tendency is to feel bad, to feel grumpy, to hunch your shoulders, to get tense. And actually, the way forward with that, because you still have to get home, there's a long way to go, is that it's how to get rid of the tension and keep walking. So that example is about how to keep walking when we're wet. Just keep walking in the rain. So ACT is a lot more about how we live with difficult experiences and have rich and fulfilling lives. And as I said, it builds on mindfulness. But there are a number of components to it, and I'm going to try and just keep it a bit simple, and I'm sorry if it's not, but I will do my best. But one of the key things is it helps you to focus on what you really value and to take steps towards living a life that is more in line with your values, as working towards values rather than happiness. And as part of that, it aims to change the way we approach our thoughts and feelings. And those thoughts and feelings may be about yourselves with the condition of AS, it may be about anxiety or anything. You know, it's just so normal to have worries, sadness, anger, and other difficult emotions. And our tendency in life, a bit like that tendency when we're out in the rain, is to not like them. We don't want them, so we fight them, we challenge them to get rid of them. And then this starts introducing the threat system. And so the threat system, which I talked about before, is about how you then tense up, it releases adrenaline, cortisol. And in ACT, we try to move away from fighting them, which I talked about in the previous session, and noticing your thoughts and separating from them. I have just noticed, so I'm going to comment, there's some comments coming in, that's for somebody here. Amanda's saying CBT, mindfulness, nature and being creative have really helped her. So I want to say that CBT can really help. I wasn't being anti-CBT, I'm saying this is actually a development of it. And so this idea of if we fight things and we try and get rid of them, sometimes they come back harder. I'll just give you a little example. If I tell you not to think about a big grey elephant, a huge grey elephant that's wrinkly and got a great trunk and big flapping ears and is making those elephant trumpeting noises. Now that I've said that and I say don't think about that, I could guarantee any of you will have a beautiful image of that big grey image of elephant in front of you. You can't get rid of it. But there's an enormous amount of energy used in trying to push those thoughts and feelings away if we don't like them. So just going to use a little visual aid here. This is what's called a Chinese finger trap. I happen to buy it from eBay. It's a child's toy. They use them in parties as a bit of a party trick. And sometimes I think visual things help you to remember things better. So this Chinese finger trap, the idea is you simply push it onto a finger and then you ask the person to try and remove it. So the first thing you do is pull and pull and pull, and the harder I pull, the tighter it gets. It's impossible, it won't come off. And the way forward is actually to look at how it's formed, the structure of it, and go with it, which in this case means that I push it backwards and gently pull it off. That is a principle, going with things rather than against them. But the desire to get rid of things we don't like, whether they're symptoms, uncomfortable thoughts, that's just understandable. We will try and avoid things. The term in ACT for that is experiential avoidance, to avoid the experience. As human beings, we are absolutely brilliant at problem solving. We are really brilliant at those problems to do with practical things. So if it's cold, we build shelters. We've got some problem solving that the government are trying to do with managing COVID, but it's all about the practical things, and that way of being we've tried to shift into our thinking. So the unseen things, where those unseen things are pain, thoughts, emotions. And the solution is not to do things that cause us discomfort. That's what you feel the solution is. We're solution focused. So if you're anxious about going out, what people will tend to do is stop going out. And I know I've met a lot of people with AS who actually do that. Some of the social anxiety that can come with AS, some people just become more reclusive. And as you find, if you don't go out, it causes a whole raft of secondary problems. It becomes harder to go out. The alternative also is, hell, just go. And if it's really uncomfortable, when you're out, it feels so awful, you just say to yourself, well, I'm not doing that again. I've given it a go. So you're pushing yourself to tolerate the pain. And tolerance is not the same as acceptance. There's a subtle difference, and I hope I can explain this. There's something about, it's walking in the rain again. If you're able to say, yes, I'm anxious, and I'm going to find a way of being with that anxiety and not avoid it and not fight it, it's the way forward. And I know it's hard. And there are other ways of avoiding things. You can avoid things with drugs, with alcohol, or just, trying to push those thoughts out of your head again. Sometimes you need a little bit of help with avoiding. So painkillers will avoid the pain. I'm not saying don't take them. There's a time and a place. And a lot of ACT is about making choices. So it's recognising that you may be avoiding and making a clear choice about that. I've got another little example to give you, which is if you imagine that all the things that are really difficult for you, which might be your anxiety, your pain, depression, they're in the form of a monster, and they're on the other side of some enormous pit, and you are joined to that monster by a rope. And what the monster's trying to do is pull you into the pit. that fear of the abyss, the pit that we don't know where it ends, we will fight, we'll do a tug of war with the monster to not let the anxiety, the depression, or whatever else it is that's difficult for you to keep from being pulled into that pit. I've got a lovely picture. I don't know if you can see it. I'm just going to move it across a bit. So there you have the monster on one side of the pit, attached to you with a rope on the other side. And it feels like there are two options. One is to pull and pull harder and harder, which is utterly exhausting. The other is to give up and go into that pit, which is terrifying. There is another way. Drop the rope. So the monster can't pull you in. But I will say the monster doesn't go by you dropping the rope. But you can look across at the monster and find out what it's made of. I'm not suggesting anything as try to be friends with the monster, but get to know it. Find out what it needs, what you need. And the thing about monsters, when you don't pull on them, is they tend to shrink a bit. So that monster may actually get less and less over time if you're not pulling on it. And I hope at the end of this, if you take some things away, one will be the finger trap, one will be the idea of the monster. Drop the rope, don't fight it, don't pull. Because being in a constant state of battle is absolutely exhausting. Some of you will suffer from fatigue, and you know what that exhaustion is like. Sometimes that exhaustion is worse from that level of fighting than it is from doing physical exercise. Many of you will know that physical exercise helps. So fatigue is a bit counterintuitive, but the physical stuff does you good. The mental stuff can sometimes really drag you down. And this is about how to live with pain. And pain's an interesting word because it can be emotional pain as well as physical pain. And for people with any kind of long-term condition, that pain can be loss. It can be a loss of the things you used to do, as well as the loss of things you were going to do. So I've given you a couple of principles there, and a lot of it, so much of it, is connected with people's thinking. So moving on to our thinking, the mind is an absolute master storyteller. Every day that storyteller is telling us things about what we should be doing, how we should be living, how we should feel, how we could have done things better, or how we can't do things because of whatever it is. It's like a radio that never stops playing in your head. Some call it radio doom. But like any storyteller, it wants to be heard, and it will try and get your attention. Sometimes that radio is playing words, and sometimes a bit like songs, it's playing images. And they grip you because it's a story, and that story may well have facts in it, but also beliefs, judgments, opinions. If you think about stories that appear in the newspapers, if you imagined a row of different newspapers, some tabloids, some broadsheet, and there was a particular story that had a kernel of facts in it, I can guarantee it will be presented completely differently in each paper. You know, imagine the pictures on the front pages. So stories generally are not facts, they may be based in them. And that's the same with the stories in your head. And we can be encouraged to rewrite the story positively, but that can be really hard. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is not to rewrite it positively and put more pressure on yourself, but to notice it. And then there's a choice. Is the story helpful or unhelpful? I mean, if you can just take a moment now, if you won't, close your eyes just for a few seconds. This is not an exercise, it's very brief. And wonder about what the story is that's going on in your head right now. Just think of it as a story. So in ACT, there's a word called fusion. And very simply, if we're fused with something, we're completely connected, we're in it. And we get connected with our thoughts, we get connected with those stories. And one of the skills is diffusion. You know, if you imagine talking about those tabloids, you're a celebrity and the papers got hold of some story about you and they tend to exaggerate them and some of it's not true. And it could be really upsetting. And we see pictures and stories about celebrities, some of whom just seem to actually let it wash and just accept what's going on, and some who get really engaged with it. So it's that engagement that's the difficulty. And if we think about our own stories in our heads, they're likely to have headlines. And those headlines, once you get to know your stories, could be things like the I'm useless story or the I can't do it story. And you believe those stories. Who knows, some of it may be right, but some of it may be just a judgment. They're only thoughts. Now here's an interesting thought about thoughts. Thoughts are not facts. They're just thoughts. ACT has a number of exercises to help you draw attention to the thoughts, to notice them more, not to control, but to accept. The first part of being able to defuse from them is to observe, to notice. I'm going to invite you now to just spend a minute with me to do the first of two little exercises. This one's called Watching Your Thinking. I have no idea where any of you are, if you're sitting down, if you've got earplugs in and walking about. If you can, take a moment to sit and notice how you're sitting. Sit up straight, breathe, be comfortable. If you feel comfortable to do so, just close your eyes. This is literally a minute, no, not even that much. Notice you're sitting, notice you're breathing. And now, gently shift your attention from that noticing to noticing your thoughts, that radio that's playing in your head. And if you can, apart from noticing the words that are there, try and notice where the thoughts feel they are, whether there's a place, whether they're high, whether they're low. If it's a voice, is it moving? Is it still? Where is it? If it's an image, again, where is it? And just watch those thoughts coming and going as if you're a curious scientist. They're very engaging, so at some point you probably get caught up in them. And that's all for now on that bit. I'll come back to it. So just open your eyes, and that's beginning to develop the skill of just being an observer of yourself and beginning to separate from your thinking and your mind. Because your mind can take over. Without anybody knowing from the outside what's going on, those headlines of I'm useless or you're useless, things that'll tell you, can be so harsh. It can be like a dictator, a fascist dictator. Got a nice little picture of a fascist dictator. Hard to be able to show this. I like this picture, but it's not very clear online. But there's a picture of a brain with the dictator over and then the little person cowed at the bottom there with the dictator dominating them. So that's a picture of the mind as a fascist dictator. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste now of how to become a real observing self. So moving on from what we did before, this is something called diffusion. I invite you once again to just sit, to notice. So once again, notice your body, notice your breathing, sit up straight, take a long, slow, deep breath. As you breathe out, just try and let everything go. And if you feel comfortable to do so, just close your eyes. Observe your breath. And what I'd like you to do now is think of a thought that you often have, those headlines. If you can't think of one, a common one that many people have is the "I'm useless" thought, or "I won't be able to do that," or "they'll think I'm an idiot." Take a few moments to choose whatever thought it is. So get to know that thought, and now I want you to spend, when I've finished talking in a moment, 10 seconds to fuse with it, to make the thought stronger in your head, in your mind, to repeat it over and over. If it's "I'm useless," you're saying "I'm useless, I'm useless." As strong as you can, now for 10 seconds. Okay. Now I'm going to invite you, when I finish the next bit of talking, to replay that. So take the thought, I'm going to say "I'm useless," and replay it with "I'm having the thought that." So I'm having the thought that I'm useless, and repeat that over and over from now for 10 seconds or so. Okay, stay with it. There's just a third round coming. You were saying in your own mind, "I'm having the thought that." Going to add a few more words in front for the third time. Now it's "I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that." I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that. So say that over and over again in your mind now. Okay, and take a breath again. And open your eyes if they're closed. But think for a moment, what was that like? How did the second time feel different to the first time, and how did the third time feel different to the second time? Did it lose some of its sting? Did that thought feel like it had less power? You were less engaged, less fused? That's just a little introduction to ways that we can have a relationship with our thoughts that are very slightly different. And the other two parts of ACT, that's the thinking part, the diffusion part. There's the acceptance part. And what is acceptance? So acceptance, what it's not, is not putting up with or resigning yourself to something, but making room for it, making space, and coming back to not fighting it. I'll give an example. When I was listening to Radio 4 one morning, some of you who know me may know I like to tell this story. Listening to the Dalai Lama being interviewed on Radio 4. And the interviewer was being a little bit pushy and said, "You must feel really angry about Tibet." And the Dalai Lama, who's famed for his smile and his gentleness, and said, "Angry? Why would I be angry?" And the interviewer said, "Because of what they did. They robbed your country, they robbed your spiritual homeland, you're in exile forever." And the Dalai Lama, you could hear his smile, laughed and said, "Why would I let them hurt me twice? I was so angry, so hurt. If I carry that, they're still hurting me." What he didn't say is the Dalai Lama does actually still campaign tirelessly. He informs people, he lets people know. So what you have there is a combination of acceptance but committed action, side by side. Another image is, not that I have experience of this, I've only seen it on television, the idea that if you go into quicksand, that if you naturally struggle and fight it, you go down. And I think the aim is you're meant to just lie there and wait to be rescued. It goes against human nature. It's counterintuitive, but it's a useful idea. And then the third part in ACT that I mentioned at the beginning, it's really important in ACT, is the idea of our values. And then I'm going to try and see how we tie our values up with our thoughts. What do I mean by values? Values are what really matter to us deep in ourselves. They're the strengths or qualities that our core selves wish to develop. And I find it really interesting when I work with people with AS, and that something I do that I developed with my brain injury clients was that people with any kind of long-term condition often refer to their old self and their new self as if they're two different selves. And one little exercise I do, another one of my visual aids, is draw two circles. Sorry, you probably can't hear me behind the paper. But the importance about those two circles with the old self and the new self is the bit that overlaps in the middle. And I've worked with people encouraging them to look at what's the same, not just what's different. And over the years, what I've just noticed more and more is what's the same of people's core values. This is the essence of you. And the bits that change are what people can and can't do in life. And the values can be seen as being the leading principles that guide us and motivate us in life. They're not about what you want to get or achieve, but about how you are and how you behave. They're ongoing words or phrases, often using the word being. So it's about being creative, being a good friend, or it might be kindness, honesty, or being kind, being honest. They're ongoing. What they are not is goals. Not to say goals don't matter, but sometimes just thinking about goals gets in the way. And wishing to illustrate this and tell you something about myself, I thought a really good example was this time last year, this week, I started a 500-mile walk across Spain, the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And it was something I'd wanted to do I'd planned it for 7 years, but wasn't sure I could do it. I mean, I've had my own issues with joint pain and difficulties, and it got put off because of my own pain, and I thought I'd never do it. And when I started, you could see the goal could be to reach Santiago in Spain. I didn't buy my return ticket because I didn't know if I was going to get there, and I didn't tell anybody I was actually going to get there. My values about doing this were about experiencing self-sufficiency, enjoying adventure, enjoying nature, about friendliness and making new contacts. I had some incredibly profound values which have been really worth revisiting for me. So one way of looking at values is they're the directions that we take. It's like a compass, the sense of going west. So I was going west all the time towards Santiago, but it's not about the achievement. A great example is about getting married. Getting married is a goal, but being loving, being affectionate, being intimate, they're values which I hope for anybody who does get married would stay there as a lifelong journey and not just about the goal of getting married. And we can live our values every step of the way towards our goals, whether we achieve our goals or not. It's a bit like anybody who does yoga. You know, you might not be able to reach your toes, or if I'm cross-legged, my knees are straight up in the air, but my intention is for my knees to reach the ground. I have a direction of travel, but even if I don't achieve it. And how to find your values. They are our heart's deepest desires for the way we want to interact with the world, with other people, with ourselves. And there's lots of stuff online which are lists, and sometimes they're helpful because we don't know where to start if we're thinking about our values. One really straightforward way of finding out about what really matters to you is look at where you hurt. I mean emotionally hurt. There's a phrase which is, in your pain you will find your values. You hurt where you care. If you take somebody who's ended a turbulent relationship and feels really rejected, they say, I'm never going to love again. Well, that cuts off the possibility of deep human connection, which is the value. But they hurt so much because they care. And there is a classic metaphor story in ACT, which I'm just going to tell you about, and I'm going to give a link to a video on the site which explains this. So imagine you have a big red double-decker bus. That bus is your life, and you're the driver of the bus. You're the driver of the bus of your life. And you know, on the front of buses, you have destination. And that destination may be a place. I'm going to encourage you to think that it can also be values. So the place is fine. If you take a goal such as somebody applying for a job, wanting a new job, that'll be their goal. But if we look at, for them, what their values might be for that goal, the values might be that they want challenge, they want recognition, being recognised, being challenged, being creative. It might be that they're making a whole new move because they're unfulfilled in what they're doing. And the idea is the bus is going towards those values. So all on board the values bus. On board that bus, unfortunately, there is a whole stack of passengers. And those passengers are the thoughts and beliefs that you have, those stories that go on in your head. So the person applying for a new job might have a passenger called self-sabotage. They might have a passenger called fear. There might be another one called depression. There could be many more. I would really invite you afterwards to take a piece of paper, to think about your values and to think about your passengers, and then passengers become a real shortcut. The headlines would be something like self-sabotage. And what would that passenger be shouting? It may well be shouting, oh, don't be ridiculous. Who do you think you are? You can't do this. Fear or anxiety might be, no, don't do it. You know what happens. You let yourself down. It's all going to go bad. People are going to laugh at you. And there could be any number of those passengers. And there may be some quieter passengers that are saying, oh, you know, you can do it. You're all right. But those negative ones tend to be very loud, back to the stories in our head. And as you're trying to drive towards your values, if it's like a road, it may be that you need to turn right. But your passengers will be shouting, no, turn left, or turn around, go back. And they're so loud, you find it very difficult to continue in your direction of travel. And what can you do about it? People tend to think of two options. One is turn around and shout back at them. Maybe you actually have to stop the bus, turn around, take up with those passengers, shut up, self-sabotage. And what happens, like the monster across the ravine, is actually they get louder, they fight back, and you're getting more exhausted, back to the fatigue. So you carry on driving. And Do you know, it feels easier to just go with them. When the passengers say, turn left, or stop, turn around, go back, if you're too tired, you just go with it. The invitation is to consider something called willingness. Willingness is where you don't fight them and you don't give in, but you stop and recognise them. They do a strange thing in all ACT. It sounds strange, it kind of works, which is thanking these thoughts and beliefs. So you stop and you say, thank you, fear. I know you're actually trying to look after me. I know you're there. I do get fearful about things, and it's to stop me doing things that might cause me harm. And once you recognise them and realise compassionately where they've come from, the idea is to gently keep going, steadily. It's better to drive your bus at 20 miles an hour and keep going in the right direction. Some people hurtle forward at 90 miles an hour and then stop or fall off or have a crash. The little video that you might want to watch shows going through some deep puddles but steadily keeping going. And that's called willingness. So I've introduced you to some concepts about how to notice and observe your thoughts, your feelings, the difficulties you have. How to recognise your values in life and your direction of travel as to where you would like to be going. And how to accept these things. I haven't talked much about mindfulness, but mindfulness is actually a key part of this. There's two little exercises that I did using a mindful approach of being calm, using a mindful breath. Some people using mindfulness reach a lovely state of calmness, and then they say, and then what? So the and then what is to recognise your values, to recognise your direction of travel, and make choices. The observing of your thoughts and beliefs are not about shutting them up, but deciding whether they're helpful or not helpful. ACT helps us to accept our thoughts and feelings, to connect with your values, and to take effective action. It is never great to just talk briefly about a therapy method because, as with mindfulness, it only works with practice. I would recommend the little book, The Happiness Trap, because it is a self-help book and you can work through it. AS is unwelcome, as COVID-19 is unwelcome, and good can come from it. It may give you a chance to have a good look at your priorities and your values and change some things for the better in your lives. Just like self-isolation time during COVID-19 can also give you that opportunity. However, I'm not naive. I know it can also bring physical limitations, sense of loss, frustration, anguish to those affected and their loved ones. It can feel like having an enemy with you or back to living with the monster. There is a chap called Ray Owen who has written a book called Living with the Enemy, which is entirely about living with a long-term condition, and it largely uses acceptance and commitment therapy. So I'm not suggesting you make friends with your AS or with your painful thoughts and feelings, but get to know them. And a process of acceptance can change everything. It really can be life-changing. And I want to repeat that ACT is only one way. I use it integrated into the way I work as a counsellor. I don't use it all the time. But it just might be something you want to be curious about and think about, and consider either some self-help or finding a therapist who works in that way. So I'm going to wish you all well. It's really lovely to feel connected in this strangely unconnected way. And I'm going to end there. Thank you for those who've made comments. I've just seen somebody, Vanessa, I'm booked to the Goose Camino next year. In fact, I'll be there a year today. Oh, well done, Vanessa. That's just fantastic. But anyway, I wish you all well. Stay safe, keep well, all the best.